Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. There are no craniums here today, so you'll have to content yourself with inanity instead. I'd like to thank Godless Cranium for lending me a few minutes on his channel. Honestly, I had no idea what I'd do for a video when JC first approached me, but just a few days later, this slid across my subscription feed.
And I thought I would throw out a challenge to any of the atheists out there who still make videos. I challenge atheists to provide the best case they can make for the existence of God.
Challenge accepted. No.
You know, Cranium, if you're watching this, you missed pointing out to this guy that there are still plenty of atheists making videos on YouTube. Just saying. Yeah. We've had a lot of people diverted down the social justice rabbit hole, but we aren't all gone and some are coming back. Okay, really, you're going to do this? You realize this means that I'm going to have to debunk you? Should be fun. Since this is Godless Cranium's channel, I'm going to speed up and maybe even skip around some. You bastards should have already watched this shit.
There you have it. I thought the thought experiment of trying to come up with some sort of argument for God was interesting, so I decided to do it. But first, I must change my way of thinking. In fact, I must change the very way that I exist. I must...
What? Oh, fuck! Oh, I'm burning up! God!
Worst orgasm ever. Hooker should demand double if she has to hear that.
Okay, so the first issue I ran into when considering this question was that I didn't know what the challenger meant by God. Did he mean a deistic sort of God? A first cause? Or an all-knowing, all-seeing God? Perhaps he meant a fallible but powerful entity that humans might think of as gods. But I didn't want that to get in the way. I believe the challenger asked his question in good faith, so I wanted to come up with some sort of answer that might be at least partially satisfying.
Well, if we dig through Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, we can see that most theologians would tell you that God is defined as some conglomeration of maximally or omni characteristics that they assert must necessarily exist. The maximalies and the omnis will swap around depending on whether or not the person that they're debating can successfully demonstrate that a particular omni is self-refuting, at which point they'll declare it maximally instead. For example, since omnipotence presents the self-refutation of having the power to create something, so heavy God couldn't lift it, the theist will switch over to maximally potent. If you point out that the problem of evil necessarily refutes omnibenevolence, God gets downgraded to maximally benevolent. In this fashion, theologians are forced to downgrade God to a lesser and lesser being to attempt to justify the existence of an infinite being in a cosmos notably lacking infinite. Because of this, I think it's fair to use your notion of a god as something so overwhelmingly powerful or awesome that human minds are convinced to worship it.
The most romantic notion of God I've ever heard was pantheistic in nature.
Gotta stop you for something petty there, my friend. The man wants convincing arguments, not romantic ones. Anyways, sorry for the interruption.
I actually read it in a Greg Iles book titled Footprints of God. In that book, Greg says, and I'm paraphrasing of course, and it's been a long time since I read the book, that humans were a way of the universe becoming conscious of itself. Here's a direct quote from the book I found that explains it in a little more detail. He always reminded us that every atom in our bodies was once part of a distant star that had exploded. He talked about how evolution moves from simplicity towards complexity, and how human intelligence is the highest known expression of evolution. I remember him telling me that a frog's brain is much more complex than a star. He saw human consciousness as the first neuron of the universe coming to life and awareness, a spark in the darkness waiting to spread to fire. If your definition for God includes a pantheistic approach to the question, I'd find this idea both seductive and not far from the truth. You could quibble about whether or not the human brain is the highest expression of evolution, or whether or not we're likely to be the first spark of awareness, but you don't have to believe in the supernatural or embrace nonsense to make this concept work.
Nonetheless, quibble we must. Evolution is not a measure of progress. As such, nothing can be its highest achievement in that sense. If anything, that which survives with the least effort, spreading its genetic material the furthest and farthest, would be the pentultimate organism, in which case the flu and common cold are our top contenders. We humans are terribly inefficient survivors, producing only a few offspring per life cycle and having to invest years into each one of them to make sure that they don't screw up and get a subprime mortgage that will ensure they're too stressed to copulate themselves. Beyond that, while it's an interesting thought experiment, we have no reason to believe that awareness is an end state for the universe, or that it would have any meaning when applied to the universe at large. Honestly, the very notion smacks of the anthropocentric hubris of arguments from design or fine-tuning. I am paraphrasing a quote which I believe came from Stephen Hawking, but the universe appears to have the goal, insofar as our local space-time can be said to have goals, not of consciousness, but of creating black holes. Certainly, far more energy and space within the universe is invested in that end than appears to cater to the formation of complex life and therefore consciousness and awareness. Finally, I have to point out that it is a purely human conceit to place value on complexity. A frog's brain may be more complex than a star, but a star can forge whole new elements and host planets around it, upon which frogs have a chance to evolve. It's all just a matter of perspective.
If I wanted to defend that analogy, I'd use the fact that we're recycled once we die. For example, what happens to the billions of atoms in our body when we die? Put frankly, they end up all over the place. Once you die, the process of decomposition begins, in which the vast array of molecules that make up your body, from fats to DNA, are broken down, and their atoms incorporated into new molecules. Hence, your carbon atoms might, temporarily, be found in a bacterium's cell wall, or combine with oxygen and be released in the CO2 of a rat's breath. It's all part of nature's never-ending recycling system that is born of the laws of the conservation of matter. Each element has a slightly different biochemical cycle, the carbon and nitrogen cycles being the stuff of school textbooks. But the upshot is that all of our atoms are incorporated into a huge array of other organisms and materials. In a ceaseless game of pass the parcel, the ultimate origin of the vast array of elements is equally astonishing, formed as they were in the bellies of stars and in spectacular supernova. As Carl Sagan so memorably put it, we're made of star stuff. And this would indeed seem like a way of our drop of water returning to the ocean of the universe, even though it technically never left.
Recall that the analogy is to your soul being a drop of water returning to the universe when you die. To me, the quotes and paraphrases GC's providing sound a lot more mystical than how GC is choosing to interpret them here, but that's for him to fight out with the author, not for me to quibble over here. Of more interest to me is the fact that the atoms which decay out of your corpse are not the atoms you were born with. They aren't the atoms you had as a teenager, and they aren't the atoms you'll have just 10 years before your death. There's a continuous turnover of atoms as you ingest food, excrete waste products, and sweat, as your cells divide and build themselves anew. If you take a molecular snapshot of yourself right now, a year from now, as much as 98% of the atoms that build you will have been displaced by other atoms. In this way, you are in a constant state of exchange with the rest of the universe. Of course, no information or awareness is being transferred in this situation, only atoms replacing one another as chemical processes churn away within you and on, but it's still sort of a wondrous kind of spiritual, insofar as that term has any meaning to anyone, sort of thing to contemplate.
Now, if you're searching for something to worship or pray to, I don't think this version of God would be satisfying. I see no reason why someone would choose to worship existence itself, although I'm sure some people might choose to do so. I could see it giving someone a more profound appreciation for our planet, our universe, and our place in the grand scheme of things, but in all honesty, I don't see any reason to call this concept God. I think it's a neat idea, and one I have previously found myself lost in thought over, but overall, I see no reason to call this concept God, to worship the universe itself, or to stop calling myself an atheist over. I do hope that this answers your challenge, though, and that the people watching found it at least mildly entertaining.
Honestly, JC, I don't think you've offered a strong argument for a god if you can't bring yourself to call it a god. But then again, I think we'd also agree with one another that if we could form an honestly compelling argument for God, we'd be theists, not atheists. Sort of goes with the territory.
If you made it this far into the video, please make your best case for a god in the comment section below. If you're a content creator, I hope you'll consider also taking up the challenge.
No, I'm sorry, challenge rejected. Obviously. I've just explained why I couldn't give a genuinely strong argument. If I had one, I wouldn't be an atheist. However, I can offer some hypotheticals for how one could get to a strong argument for some god. I don't think there will ever be a good argument for deism, simply because cause and effect is only known to apply within our local space-time, and therefore first-cause arguments are intrinsically rubbish. We know this logically because a cause is defined as occurring prior to its effect, and that to have something happen prior to something else, it must necessarily exist in time, time being a component of space-time, and fail. Worse, we know that the Big Bang was almost certainly initiated by a quantum event based on the physics, and we know that quantum events can and do occur without cause, even within our local space-time. So again, there is no need to postulate a first cause. Without such a need, we can set aside all deistic concepts of God and move on to other gods that we might care about. Since we know that our theist is an apologist for Christ, we could perhaps build a case for his God. But we need all of the following. Definitive proof of modern man's descent from a single couple. Definitive proof that said couple ate some magical fruit. Definitive proof that upon magical fruit consumption they spontaneously gained all knowledge necessary to build civilization, as no such existed at creation, but by the time of Cain and Abel, we had cities, domesticated animals, croplands, civilization, and that they were cursed for this knowledge. Beyond this, we then need definitive proof that Jesus existed, performed miracles, was executed, bodily resurrected, performed additional miracles, and flew off into the sky to live in heaven, and that he did all of this to atone for the eating of magical fruit. Now, we don't have that. If anything, we have strong evidence against just about all of it. So, this isn't a strong argument for God. But like I said, I'm necessarily dealing in hypotheticals to try and answer how we could get to strong arguments for God. So how about theistic gods in general? Strong arguments for a theistic God could be developed if we ever saw evidence that prayers to one particular god were readily answered, or miracles were able to be performed in said god's name. Of course, we'd have to first rule out fraud, deception, as yet misunderstood physical phenomena, and hell, alien interference before we could make such a ruling, and we'd also need truly excellent documentation of the events so as to study them for said causes. But if you had that, then you could build a strong probabilistic case for that god. To me, the best argument for gods existing in the past would be the crazy guys on Ancient Aliens. They may be cruelly dismissive of human achievement to believe in the argument, but there is at least some basis in reality to suppose that at some point in our past, aliens with the necessary technology to pose as gods visited Earth and did in fact pose as said gods. And since, relative to the humans alive at that time, the technology possessed by these aliens would be maximally powerful, allow for maximal knowledge, and with their nanotech, their starships, and perhaps even teleportation, they could be as close to omnipresent as achievable. So, as theologians continue to dilute God's powers to reflect reality and our technology gets more advanced, we will reach a point where we, too, can become gods. We just have to find some dim-witted Stone Age Alpha Centaurians to lord over. I'm Inane Dragon, and if you've enjoyed this inanity, consider checking out my channel for more of the same. If not, feel free to take it out on Godless Cranium. Thank you all, and have a good night.